here I think the crisis has been created artificially, to my extent, to my impression, very largely with respect to the practice that Indigo has adopted in terms of having only that many minimum required pilots and crew, and trying to maximize their exploitation, which has crossed a lot of acceptable limits and is well into the unsafe zone. And that is what has resulted in the entire process. Piecemeal solution is not going to solve the problem. We've seen that happening, and the situation has not changed at all over the last 50 years. So if you really want to go make a major change, a major overall major restructuring of DGCA will be necessary. And second, the
Also,
Ministry of Civil Aviation, in this case, the Ministry of Civil Aviation, I think there's a strong case for him to resign immediately. He should have been held accountable as well. So also the secretary. Anyway, for the affected people, the compensation should be even bigger. If you really ask me, for the kind of pain they've gone through over the last 4 days. But the bigger penalty is what I would say: the monopoly must be broken up. This is an unethical, unhealthy monopoly that Indigo enjoys, and this should never be allowed. So, in my opinion, Indigo should be broken up into 3 entities.
hello and a warm welcome to HW News Network, your one-stop show, truth be told, for some engaging and thought-provoking conversations. Indigo's mass cancellations of flights this week have disrupted the travel plans of thousands of passengers, triggering anger and chaos at the airports across the country. The mess is expected to continue in the coming days as the Indian carrier cancels flights amid crew shortages. Now, Indigo, what we are told, has grounded several flights since Tuesday. It's almost like the fifth day of the crisis, with more than 1,000 flights which have been cancelled till yesterday. Thousands of passengers have been stranded by last minute cancellations, with many forced to seek alternative modes of transport and the uncertainty. Despite the crisis, Indigo is still selling tickets, the prices of which have skyrocketed as the demand remains high while supply is limited. So, who is responsible for this aviation mess? And the watchdog, Director General of Civil Aviation, DGCA, which is supposed to be watching over the airlines, seems to have completely crumbled under the pressure of the airline. So, what does it go to show about this entire aviation sector? Is it on the brink of collapse? Joining me this evening is retired Air Marshal M. Mateswaran. Thank you so much for joining on HW News. My first question, sir, to you is that is this crisis artificially created? Because this was something which could have been averted, but apparently due to some gaping holes in the systems, or it's rather looks like a systemic failure. So, what would you really say to a crisis which looks artificially created?
Yes, it is definitely there is an element of artificial, aspect involved in it. Uh, the fact that the new change in the rules on the flight time duration limit issue is required to be adhered to was brought out in January 2024. And then the airlines have been, Indigo at the forefront of it, have been getting deferred every 6 months. And it's 2 years now. And now they've actually precipitated the whole thing. So, what is in the background of all this? So, the issue is to not to go for more new pilots, because that is costs the company more, and therefore and try and do maximization of the utilization of aircraft and the pilots. The objective is quite clear: the number of aircraft that's there on the ground is, it's not generating revenue. And when pilots are on the ground, again, the company feels that they're not generating revenue. So as per the original rule, 12 hours they can fly and 12 hours they need to be rest. Uh, they've created that optimized group optimization system that actually plans everything so that the maximization of utilization of aircraft and pilots is done in this entire process. So it is a ruthless, maximization process. And obviously, when you stretch it now, when you don't have the buffer, when you don't have a bit of a lax or a flexibility, then you're with whatever you have, you're trying to use them, to the maximum. So what happens is there's a pilot who flies from, let's say, Delhi to Bangalore, and then he has to, he's rostered again into another flight, or somebody else has to come and take up, he has to get a rest. Then somebody else flies from somewhere else, and in a airline that is operating 2,000 plus flights. So the combination is stretched. It depends on each flight, depends on somebody else coming in here, the crew changing somewhere else. And if one breaks somewhere, it has a cascading effect. So that's exactly what has happened. That is one.
No, but what do you
And
think was the major reason of this crisis having triggered to this level? Because for the last 4 days, if this crisis has been built up, there are no options as to, of course, the other airlines have been adding up their capacity. Indian Railways has stepped in. But what is the major reason? What is the reason for this crisis, according to your
well,
assessment?
oh, there are all kinds of conspiracy theories are also floating around because Putin's visit, and that is there some involvement of the West into it to create attention away from, Putin's visit? That is that's
Oh,
a one. Of course, it's quite outlandish theory. But leaving aside that, I think the airline wanted to actually now exercise its power over the DGCA regulation, and therefore, when you now create a catastrophic situation like this, what it wanted exactly has happened. At the end of 2 years, now the DGCA was now forced to ensure that the deadline on the regulation is implemented because of a Supreme Court order. They didn't have a leeway in that. So now, when this catastrophe now takes place, then they go and get a concession till February 10th. And now we don't know what kind of a maneuvering will take place in this process because from six landings at night, a pilot is now restricted to two landings, but they've got the concession to go back to the original one. And after February 10th, it is unlikely that they'll accept two. So there could be some via media here. So fundamentally, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be falling foul of international norms. The ICAO and others will now say the safety standards in India's airlines are questionable. And this is something I think we need to be conscious of. So there is an element of artificially created catastrophe, and Indigo is certainly a culprit in this entire process, along with a system that for profit maximization that they've been using has contributed immensely to this entire issue.
No, but how can an airline have such predatory instincts, to the extent of inconveniencing the passengers to this level? And what I'm not able to understand is that what is DGCA doing? What is the aviation ministry doing? So are they not watching? Were they not watching as to what happened, and how on earth did Indigo reach the things to this level?
I would only say they're complicit in this entire process. You look at how Indigo has grown from when they started off in 2005, 2006 onwards. They were a low cost airline. They're anything but a low cost airline today. That's one. Besides that, look at their pricing system. You book a ticket and thereafter you are forced to actually buy a seat, and there are no seats that are free. And even if those free seats are there, the Indigo system, the online system, indicates that no seats are free, and therefore many people will end up buying it. The other option, if you're smart enough, you just don't select your seat and move ahead. But they are under pressure all the time. What kind of a seat you'll get and where you will be put in. But that is maximization of the revenue. The other aspect is on the baggage. No airline abroad limits you to 15 kgs. Of course, most airlines have also switched to charging for baggage right from zero onwards. Some of the airlines in abroad, but this is a very unethical model. And I would say, if as Captain Amit said in the previous one, if uh, profitability in an airline is limited, is fairly thin margins available, then you should look at those reasons and then deal with those reasons with the government. And I believe there is a case for it, because the government sees any airline industry as a milk cow to be taxed to the maximum possible. So those tax issues can be actually, as all airlines can get together, address that issue, and the government is interested in airline business growing, so that more connectivity and everything is better. But two things that the government has to do: readdress the tax system, and also bring in more competition in amongst the airlines. You can't have a monopoly system like this. It is unethical. And while that facilitates better airline operations, you need to be very, very strict on safety issues, safety regulations to be implemented. Absolutely. A pilot doing 6 landings at night is certainly not a safe situation at all. The
Right.
airlines are managed by not pilots. Only pilots will understand that process. So
Yeah.
you had cases of people while walking to the aircraft, the captain or the pilot dying of heart attack in recent times. There are people who, at the age of 40, and these are all stress factors that become cumulative and result in these kind of situations.
Absolutely. In fact, I was also looking at few reports which go to point out as to where this compromise is arising from. Now, there is a report which clearly says that various airlines are donating huge sums of money to BJP. Now, say for example, the Interglobe Group has donated 56 crore to 4 political parties, while SpiceJet gave 70 lakh to Aam Aadmi Party. BJP got the lion's share of 31 crore from Interglobe Real Estate Venture, and Interglobe Air
Mm,
Transport 11 crore. This is the second
mm,
biggest recipient, and surprisingly, TMC, which got 16.2 crore from Rahul Bhatia, who's the Indigo promoter. So what? And
mm.
Congress got a mere 5 crore. So what does this go to show? When airlines are donating money to the ruling parties in various states, uh, isn't compromise with the passenger safety becomes a casualty there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, business houses don't donate money for charity, correct? So if he's giving it, that too, if they're giving it to a political party, they will extract much more than what they give. So that 56 crores that he donates to the political party, he will extract probably 150 crores through his business by getting concessions and policy changes and relaxation of regulations. That's exactly what has happened. That
And I
compromises
think
passenger safety.
Air Marshal Matheswaran, I think this is also the reason why the airlines seem to be having an upper hand on the government, because they know that they know how to arm twist the government. They are paying crores and crores of money to the ruling party, so they might as well just get the things done their way.
Absolutely. You see this particular case itself. It's a 2-year time frame. DGCA and Ministry of Civil Aviation can come down like a ton of bricks on Indigo and say, we will take off your licenses if you don't comply with it. They
Yeah.
had 2 years to recruit more pilots, right? And you don't, I mean, don't give them more routes. They're dominating in some areas. They don't let other airlines come in at all. So they could have taken away those routes, redistributed those routes, and say, okay, you fly within your limitations. This is the job of the regulator. You see, the regulator, obviously, I mean, in a democracy and in a political system, and if political pressure comes, then it depends. There are only few who will stand up to it. Many will just succumb to it. Unfortunately, that's the problem.
During this crisis, we also saw how DGCA withdrew its own circular on the pilot flying rules. What does it go to show? What is DGCA up to? It looks like a compromised institution totally. There's a lot of conflict of interest also reported. So, how can DGCA become such an efficient watchdog then? And obviously, the passengers' lives will be always on the threshold then.
But that's a problem. DGCA has always been weak. I'm talking about in terms of professional. There have been one or two exceptional, bureaucrats who've headed DGCA, but by and large, DGCA has been headed by people who hardly know anything about aviation, and therefore their involvement becomes a problem. And unless you have very, very strong professionals involved in DGCA and they're neutral and they have, the regulations and the passenger safety as a prime important issue in their mind, and there the enforcement will not happen. And that has always been the problem with. There's no point in crying, that things have gone wrong after a catastrophe like this takes place. So dilution of their own regulation, I don't think that can happen easily because it's a Supreme Court directive now. And but they may get some kind of, may go back to the court and say, okay, instead of two landings, can four landings or three landings be, acceptable? Once again, those people who've taken this to the court must actually pursue the case very, very strongly and ensure that international norms are completely enforced in India as well. And we've had, I mean, the AI 171 should have woken up a lot of people. The investigation and the process has been so, I would say, didn't send the right messages to a lot of people, because the when a pilot is no more and is gone, the first action is to blame him rather than, look at other possibilities. And before you start looking at, blaming a pilot, you must actually rule out everything else. But the first action they do is, but that serves the company that has been involved, to whitewash what they've actually done. So I think business houses must always be suspect, seen as a suspect in business practices. And the watchdog has to be very, very strong. The regulator, the government, they have to be very, very strong in these areas.
No, but Marshal Matheswaran, the point is that if the DGCA is compromised, DGCA is operating under the thumb of the airlines. Airlines are doing what they want, and the government is prostrating or looks like to be prostrating because of the crores and crores of donations which the ruling party is getting. So obviously, where is this mess headed to? Will India ever be able to resolve this aviation crisis?
I don't think it's going to happen very soon. But the only way to address this is, people will have to raise the issue now. You see, once the flights situation gets back to normal, majority will forget what they've suffered and they'll go back to their own work. But that's the problem. This needs to be taken up as a major issue and has to be debated in the parliament. And I think you need to restructure a lot of things. You see, you need to bring in, various regulations and involvement of the commercial entities in regulatory mechanisms where conflict of interest becomes a serious issue should never be allowed. So, how do you get the system resolved? You probably have to restructure DGCA in a big way. You need to bring another watchdog over the DGCA as well, and then bring in the enforcement mechanisms onto the airlines in a big way.
No, but
And as
bringing
I
in another
said,
watchdog, like what you said, bringing in another watchdog over DGCA, is that going to resolve the crisis when maybe it could be another DGCA of the present form part two? There will be compromised people with compromised integrity, or there will be people who will be aligned with the ruling party, or people with the airlines. So, what? How will the DGCA part two, or somebody who's overseeing DGCA, will really help? Can it really help when there is no
when I
political will
say,
actually?
no,
Yes.
when I say overseeing DGCA is purely in terms of ensuring that the appointments to DGCA are not compromised. That's the primary issue. And then DGCA has the job very clearly defined in enforcing the regulations, of formulating more safety procedures and regulations, periodic inspections that needs to be done, and the licensing systems. These are all must be fairly transparent, and the parliament needs to get involved, because this, I think, is becoming beyond acceptable limits the way the current situation has happened. So this is something I think we need to actually, a piecemeal solution is not going to solve the problem. We've seen that happening, and the situation has not changed at all over the last 50 years. So if you really want to go make a major change, a major overall major restructuring of DGCA will be necessary. And second, the
Also,
Ministry of Civil Aviation, in this case, the Ministry of Civil Aviation, I think there's a strong case for him to resign immediately. He should have been held accountable as well. So also
Right.
the secretary.
That's a strong observation. You're saying that the civil aviation minister should have resigned. Probably some more penalties on Indigo, but all that is not being discussed. But another conspiracy theory, or rather, there are reports that was this crisis artificially created to benefit Adani? Because now there are reports, and this happened on 28th of November. There were reports that Adani Defense Systems and Technology, in collaboration with Prime Aero Services, finalized agreements to acquire a majority stake in Flight Simulation Techniques Center Private Limited, which is FSTC, which is India's largest flight training and simulation provider, for an enterprise value of 820 crore. Now, this brings me to the question that is Adani trying to enter the airline sector or the pilot training sector? They want to have a monopoly. They already have a monopoly with so many sectors. Now, with this crisis having created, and we already know the kind of monopoly which Indigo enjoys and Tata enjoy. So maybe Adani could be the third corporate group which is going to enter the airline sector. Is that a possibility?
I don't think so, Nilu, because I think one needs to look at it. See, the simulation is a training sector activity, and simulators for these aircraft is absolutely something that is necessary. So, in fact, if you ask me, there is a great case for building or establishing a lot of training and simulation centers in the country for the overall for a sector that's growing at a tremendous rate. So if somebody enters that sector, I think that is a separate issue altogether. Second is, what is important is all simulators are imported. I mean, we don't build any of these simulators. And if it is an Airbus simulator, so it's related to Thales will build that simulator. If it's a Boeing one, then Boeing itself will build that simulator. And there is a case for expanding that process into getting Indian companies involved, bringing in capabilities, pick up skills from those industries. So the that business by itself will actually contribute better to the overall, ability in addressing the safety issues, and also build technology capabilities, industries, skill levels. Whole lot of things will benefit from that. So I don't think that will have any relation to this. Here, I think the crisis has been created artificially, to my extent, to my impression, very largely with respect to the practice that Indigo has adopted in terms of having only that many minimum required pilots and crew, and trying to maximize their exploitation, which has crossed a lot of acceptable limits and is well into the unsafe zone. And that is what has resulted in the entire process.
But Marshal Matheswaran, how will and you said that the aviation minister should have resigned, but what about the penalty on Indigo? What kind of penalty? How should they be penalized for what they have done for the last 4 days?
Absolutely. I mean, they
Because
should
they
be
are refunding
penalized.
the money. No, I was reading that the Indigo ministry has asked Indigo to refund the money of the passengers. Is refund the only solution to the problem?
No, not at all. So, anyway, for the affected people, the compensation should be even bigger, if you really ask me, for the kind of pain they've gone through over the last 4 days. But the bigger penalty is what I would say: the monopoly must be broken up. This is an unethical, unhealthy monopoly that Indigo enjoys, and this should never be allowed. So, in my opinion, Indigo should be broken up into three entities,
No,
or
but
at
sir,
least two entities.
when you say that monopoly should be broken, so the only way to break the monopoly is that you get in a third player or you get in a fourth player, then only you can break in the monopoly. So that's why I asked you today. Congress has also tweeted that to benefit
Mm.
Adani, it seems this crisis was like a manufactured crisis to benefit Adani. Congress has tweeted on this.
Well, if that is the case, then what that implies is that Adani is wanting to now take one part of the a big share into the Indigo operations or Indigo airlines, and break away into a separate airline. I mean, that is
Okay.
possible, but I don't think they have an interest, because building an airline, you see, Interglobe had a 20-year lead in being in air operations business, although they were doing ground
So
handling.
knowing Adani, they venture into new segments also. And we've seen all these years, they get into mining, they get into cements, green energy.
Yes, yes,
So
that's
now when they are getting into the simulation training programs of the pilots, what stops them from getting into the airline sector? And nobody stops them from breaking Indigo also. So this could be
quite
a
possible.
design. This could be a
Quite
design,
possible.
sir, break Indigo into two parts or three parts, and maybe Adani would own one.
Quite possible. Quite possible. I would say, we need to go back and question why were Kingfisher and Jet Airways, which were running well. Of
Yeah,
course, the owners, mismanaged and mishandled the financial aspects of it. But this is where governments have to get in. So you don't kill an airline because the owner is, mishandled. You take him to task, imprison him. What you've done with the other one is also an example. The UP-based businessman who was running another airline. But the idea is, you create a competitive environment which actually work towards a more healthy, better, air transportation system rather than allowing each one to die out. And that's what has happened. Now, to create a new one is going to be a Herculean task. But that is what it is possible. Adani, as you explained, whether they want to get into it, it is very much possible. But if they're getting into simulator area, that's a different one. That doesn't really impact on this. Despite the simulation part, the Indigo, in my opinion, needs to be broken up into at least two entities.
absolutely. So let's see how government resolves this issue. But fundamentally, what we are seeing is that the aviation sector is in a real big mess. The watchdog looks compromised, not following the rules, and to top it all, the airlines seem to be having an upper hand on the watchdog. And can it be more abysmal than what we are seeing? Thank you so much, Marshal Matheswaran. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Nilu. It was a pleasure.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you very much.
Thank you, sir. Same. Bye.